Okay, so what I think we'll do is I'll break down this kick a little bit further. It's one that's in progress, and it's pretty close to being finished, to be honest. Break down the process, what I listened to, and what I was listening for, and the decisions that I made, because that's just as important. Knowing what to listen for and knowing how to think and stuff. And then I'll play you some of the other finished ones that I've done, how to break those down and what to listen for and so on and so forth. And then just, I think, because you guys have got a lot of questions, just, yeah, spend the rest of that time just answering your questions. Like, I'm more than happy to answer anytime, whatever, but I think while we're all here and you have questions, let's answer them. But, okay, going back to the kick, this is one that is pretty much done. Okay, whoa, turn that down just a little bit. This one is straight out of Drumazon. There's no other processing except for using the Logic plugins. So, yeah. As you can see, it's quite a strip of plugins. It looks a little bit strange, and especially like if you don't know how I use the bit crusher, that can seem like, whoa, what? Just to re-emphasize how I use this bit crusher, I don't use it to actually bit crush a sound. I use it as a straight clipper. It basically just chops everything up from the top and the tail and distorts. You could use Isotope Trash to do the exact same thing, but just as a challenge for myself and because I don't trust the other plugins on this laptop. I've decided to use the bit crusher, and hey, nevertheless, it's pretty much the same. But look, going back from this, we'll open up Drumazon. Finally, in a good resolution. And that's pretty close. And I guess, like, if I start taking things off, you'll be able to hear how the sound is transformed. And you'll see that there is no magic one plugin that kind of, okay, that's it, that's the magic, and I can go home now and make kicks for the rest of my life. No. I wish it was that easy, you know, but it's not that simple. Okay. We all know this. I've kind of tweaked it a little bit when I was at home, but yeah. This doesn't matter so much. What you see on Drumazon, the tune depth, the attack, or whatever, doesn't matter too much. It might help you give a little bit more distortion when the sweep slides down, you get more of an aggressive thing, but in this particular case, I just thought, okay, let's turn it up. So I turned the level all the way up. In attack, yeah, that sounds good. Let's turn it all the way up as well. Okay, the next stage, you'll see I've got a channel EQ. I'll explain that in a little bit, but I actually use the clip distortion right after this. Like I said before, this is the basis for early hardcore, for early rave. This is kind of as far as they went. After that, I put an EQ. Okay, I explained a little bit before how it works. I found these resonant frequencies, these are really good. If I start taking them away and not boosting as much, say, see here just at 700 hertz. Whoops, that's a snare. You start hearing some of the tone coming out. I'll put the distortion on after that because we're going to go a little bit crazy here. Oh, my bad. See, that tone, boosting those frequencies allows me to get that kind of a tone, which is, we're about 10% of the way there. Now let's make some more room for the distortion. That's why I've got this low shelf here. Magic, All of a sudden you start getting that bite. If I take that away, Oh, it sounds really cool down at 13, I like that. Oh, that's pretty dope. The reason why it's giving you that tone is because these frequencies are being emphasized. Because the distortion doesn't have this much low frequencies to then distort. I'll put this low cut here because I use the symmetry here. So like I said, the symmetry is, it's sitting up like this. If you were to look at it, I think through the smexoscope, and I take this EQ off, it looks a little bit, see how it's kind of all wobbly and everything? Yeah, put that on, kind of smooths it out. How cool is that? We've got to thank electrical engineers for discovering that. That's something they discovered with radios and everything, but it helps smooth that out. And the reason why this is important is because we're going to keep on distorting. So even the minor subtle differences, it might be just a little bit of a dip like this. It might be because it's up like that or down like this. That makes a huge difference. Because if I take this off and move the symmetry down like here, you can see that it moves. And hey, like if you've got it, it doesn't matter where you put it. It matters that you can use it and you can change it so you can get the right sound. But regardless, if you want to rectify, this is a cool word, you want to rectify that signal, put that high pass filter there, and it makes a huge difference. And then after discovering that, you know, I was like, oh cool, yeah, distorting away, yeah, that's sick, that's awesome. I put one right at the start because that makes a difference as well. It's a subtle difference, but that difference really starts to come out further down the line as you keep on distorting. At this particular point, I decided, well, I want this to be like a little bit more of an aggressive kick. This is really tonal, not quite like a jump or tech kick, but I wanted to get a little bit more dirty. So I started adding some reverb. Really subtle difference there. Now, at this point, I thought, okay, well, I need to, whoopsie daisy. I need to shape this a little bit more. I need to sculpt this a little bit more because right now, it still just sounds like a distorted kick. It doesn't sound like a hardstyle kick. How do we get that? Well, this is where, you know, knowing your frequencies comes into play. You know, you can sit there and look at the spectrum analyzer and say, okay, well, mine lacks a little bit here. That's good. That's visual clues to try and get whatever help you need. But, you know, knowing with your ears and practicing at home, where you can boost and take out stuff, will be able to help you say, okay, well, I can distort this here, and I can resonate this here, and it's going to sound cool. So I added this EQ with the distortion unit after this. The compressor and the auto filter that you see there are plugins that I actually added afterwards once I got a kind of cool sound. Not much bass there. That's cool. I add that in right afterwards. Now we're getting somewhere. Cool. At this particular point when I was building it, okay, so I'm like, okay, cool, I'm really getting that bark. That's pretty awesome, but I haven't got much movement. Let's, you know, let's add the auto filter. Now it's moving just a little bit. It's emphasizing some more resonant frequencies up on the visualizer. You can see it's like it's going a bit crazy here at 600 hertz, and that's what you want because that is really going to cut through on a club system. Yes, bass is really important, but this is just as important, if not more, for a hardstyle kick. Because at the end of the day, you know, when you're at a club, you hear that big tok tok come in, and you're like, oh yeah, man, yeah, let's go, let's dance. You know, if you hear it on a laptop as well, you hear those frequencies come out. You're not going to hear, I mean, a little bit of 200 hertz. You're definitely not going to hear 100 hertz on your laptop. And forget about listening to, you know, 49, 40 hertz or whatever the kicks are down there. No, it's just not going to happen. But you can still get a good idea if a kick sounds good by listening to that real punch over there. Now, our gentleman down the front asked if I compressed a kick. Yes and no. Not really when I've finished with it, not in the mix. I might do that to some vocals, I might do that to some leads. But when I'm building a kick drum, I use a very creative way of doing it. I call it creative because it's not really following the rules of what compression is used for. What I wanted to do here was to compress the signal after the attack has gone through. So the way that a compressor works is like it gets a signal, it says, you know, how long it should wait for the attack, how long it should wait for the compressor to kick in, and then the ratio, so how much it should compress that signal by, and then the release when it should let go. What I did here was like, I measured, because 150 BPMs is around 50 milliseconds, 100 and so on and so forth. I measured like how long I wanted the attack to be, and how much of this I wanted to do, and how distorted I wanted it to be. So 50 milliseconds was a good average in this particular case. So that the attack would be uncompressed, then I would gain that up, boost it a little bit, and then that would be more distorted than the rest of the signal following as it goes into the distortion. So, cool? See, it's different now. It's completely different. And it might not sound that great, but that's cool. We're coming after that. We're coming after that. We're going to add. It kind of controls a little bit more and really emphasizes that attack. And usually, like, I don't, when I'm working on a kick, I'm not always, I don't do that. I kind of let it loop for a bar. So then the compressor has a little bit more time to recover afterwards. You'll see that I use reverb here as well. This is just a little bit, you know, or actually no, not this one. To try and give that kick a little bit more space to make it sound a little bit bigger. Here it's got more of a sustain, particularly in those middle frequencies around 500 to 800 hertz. It sounds more like a pa. Yeah, that's good. We want that. That's what we want in a hardstyle kick. Really important to get that. And reverb is kind of like that secret ingredient, that magic salt, that whatever it is that helps you get a bigger sound and, more importantly, that sound. After this, loaded in some EQ, like I said before, just kind of like giving some more low end, giving some more high end. And I've got this little, you know, high pass filter just to fix up the signal a little bit. I mean, let's see how we're doing here on the Smexoscope. So I should have said before, Voxengo Span and Smexoscope are both free plugins. You can Google them. Voxengo Span, if you go to voxengo.com, you'll be able to find it. Smexoscope is like a freeware thing that I don't remember how I found it, but it seemed pretty cool. And it just basically gives you a real-time analysis of what's actually happening with your audio. This is important because our listening environment is not always perfect, and our ears are not always perfect. The way I listen to music is going to be different to the way that you listen to music, and the way that you listen to music. Our ears are just shaped differently because of genetics. We're human beings. Sorry, man. But what doesn't lie is science and graphs and maths. So we can use these tools to kind of get a better idea of like where we can do things if we're in a suboptimal room. So if we take a look, okay, cool. You can see that the compressor is really doing a lot of stuff here right at the front. I'm going to put another, distortion after that. I've really gained it this time, so that's cool. I squared that off, and if you want to stop squaring, once again, you just start putting some more stuff in the EQ, and away you go. I thought that I needed a little bit more high end. It just gives you a little bit more fuzz and stuff. And I started boosting like, this is kind of more in a creative thing. You hear it starting to really come alive, especially when I give it like a... It doesn't make much sense to have a high shelf that boosts all the frequencies, above 350 hertz, but I thought that it really made this one come alive. I'm nearly there. And then find a little bit of distortion. Let's take this off. And this is kind of like, 50% of the way there. The rest of the stuff, what I do is then I'll bounce this down and then take it into, I prefer to use Cubase, but people can use Logic, Ableton, Fruity Loops, Pro Tools, Studio One, whatever you like, to then process this further, because the distortion part of this kick is pretty much done. Now, something else that I touched on a little bit beforehand was like breaking the sound up and trying to listen in different ways. There's the punch, there's the tail, and the tail is made up of a character and a sub. So how can we do that? How can we listen to that? Well, what we can do is, if we just want to listen to the sub, simple, low pass filter, man. Just load up your EQ. You can start to see if those harmonics, are doing all right. In this particular case, because I've got reverb and I haven't put this to mono, you can see that the left and right signal are kind of off. If I just want to listen to the character, I just want to hear how this thing sounds, like in the bark. And because our human ears, really like bass, we get confused by bass. So I don't want to do that. I want to be really specific. I want to be able to listen to how this kick drum sounds without getting too confused. I want to hear that character. Simple high pass to just take a listen, and often I'll listen to this for an hour. Like that, just to say, okay, is that right? Is that not right? Are the harmonics right? Is there something that's a little bit out of key there? Because sometimes if you use different distortion units, your own kick drum will be out of tune with itself. So, listening to it, high pass can give you a way to sort of fool the brain, if you will, or rather to overcome the way that the brain normally works. Then the other thing that I do as well is, and I'm just going to shrink the zoom, thank you very much, is I use Lfo Tool. This is a plugin from one of deadmau5's friends, and basically all it does is just volume automation. And the reason why I do this is so that I can once again separate how I listen to things. Because of the Haas effect, the brain thinks anything between 2 to 50 milliseconds is the same sound. That's just part of our brain, man. We can't really fix that. But what we can do is figure out a way on how to not work with that and how to get around that. So I use Lfo Tool as a way to, basically get around that, to not listen to the punch and to listen to the tail. I'll just loop it for a bar. And if you just listen to the tail by itself, it's pretty much done. If I listen to the attack, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, almost there. So a lot of the times when I'm distorting and I'm resonating and I'm adding stuff, I'll actually do this with the Lfo tool and the volume automation. You can use whatever you like. You know, the cable guys have got another plugin. I can't remember what it's called. Or if you really, feeling brave, grab the volume and then automate it itself. The result is the same. The whole idea is basically to overcome your brain's natural way of listening to sound so that you can separate the sound of the kick drum into its distinct and separate elements. And often what I'll do as well is just use those two techniques in serial right away, so that way I can hear what I'm specifically going for. And it's really important to be able to listen and identify errors or areas of improvement for your kick drum. So say for instance, I'm listening to this and I'm like, I think that the kick could do with a little bit more, okay, let's try moving some of these frequencies over here. Listening to it with the Lfo tool on a loop gives you a better way to sort of like pull that apart and listen, because it's really important to be able to listen to the whole thing. I mean, yeah, the brain can get overwhelmed by a big bassy signal, especially if you cranked it up loud like I do, and you're kind of like, well, woof, woof, yeah. Oh, no, you don't know what you're listening for. So trying to work around that is immediately important. But nevertheless, this is our probably 50% there finished kick drum. What I'll do from here, as I said before, is I'll load it up into Cubase, and I'll chop it up into its separate elements. So, okay, I'll have the punch on one channel, and I'll go and further EQ that, and then I'll have the tail, and then have that on a separate channel as well, and then further EQ that. And what I think is really handy, and this is thanks to maths again, there's a lot of maths that goes into audio, is to use a linear phase EQ. A linear phase EQ to try and cut up your sound into different things. And the reason why I'll use linear phase EQ, it's normally a mastering EQ, is because when you start EQing stuff, the math that is involved kind of distorts the signal a little bit. And when I mean distort, I mean like it's not 100% precise. Yeah, so there's going to be some stuff here and there. It's going to mess with the phase of some of the upper frequencies. And if you layer the same signal on top of each other after EQing it, it can phase and not necessarily give you the result that you want. A linear phase EQ will calculate and pre-calculate and take in accommodation for the errors that are going to be introduced. So it adds a little bit of latency onto the workstation that you're using. But nevertheless, that means that when you stack stuff on top of each other and EQ it with a linear phase EQ, it's going to be right, it's going to be precise, it's not going to start phasing, it's not going to be all over the place. And what I'll do is I'll have my tail, I'll separate it out, and what I mean by this is I'll have it on two channels. One is a linear phase EQ that is a high pass, so it lets all the highs pass, and I put that around 350 hertz so I can properly listen to the top, the character. And then I'll have the tail low passing at the same frequency. And the reason why I do this is because maybe I need to work on the tail, but I love the low end. I don't want to touch that low end. So the linear phase EQ with the tail there, focusing on just the sub, will help you really identify and leave that where it is. And then afterwards you can tailor the character if you need to give it a little bit more distortion, or if you need to give it a little bit more high end. It's not going to play with the phase stuff that happens at the low end. And that's a great tip that will help you sort of merge and squish everything together. And I'll do the same thing actually for the punch. Because the lower end in a hardstyle punch isn't actually immediate. It's not right away. I'll see if I can, I don't know if I can do this. Let's see. Take this one. I'm going to put it. Oh. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to low pass this. I'm going to see if I can bounce. Oh, actually, we can watch that with this Mexoscope. look at that shape. So this is just the low end. Now, if you'll see that the low end doesn't start right away, it sort of fades in and then goes into the tail. This is just something that happens with hardstyle kicks. Maybe because it sounds a little bit better in clubs. And maybe it's because of the way that we listen to the actual kick itself. We hear the 700, the club frequencies more than we do to the bass, and then we feel the bass that comes a little bit afterwards. I'm not too sure why it is the way that it is. I just do it because it's kind of done. But that's really important as well, because when you export like your kick out, and you just have it low pass, you can see that the low end starts right away. It's not what you want. However, if you separate this out using, layering it up, okay, we've got the punch up here, high pass filter at 300 hertz, and then, or 350 or whatever, and then have a low pass for the punch at, same thing, 350 hertz. You can kind of tailor that a little bit more. You can, fade in the low end, but still keep the highs, and you don't have to worry too much about everything going all over the place. You've got a little bit more control over it. And I think that's the other thing that's really important when it comes to putting a kick all together. You've got your distortion. You need the control over the separate elements now. Someone was asking before, what do I do? Do I just chop off the tail and move things around? Simply, yeah. But obviously, there's a lot of tweaking involved. There's a lot of listening involved. So yeah, if I bounce this out, let's do that actually. Let's just bounce it out. What I think is really helpful as well is to number stuff and label stuff, because nothing is more frustrating than having a file name that's that you've just vomited on the keyboard. No, be specific. Be specific, because that way you can go back and trace your steps. And it happens to all of us. Nothing is perfect. Your project will crash. Some plugin will go all over the place. You'll forget something. Label it as you go along. And even, like what I like to do is label what I do afterwards. So I'll bounce something, and then I'll put an EQ, and then I'll bounce it again and say that I put EQ on it. So that way I know where it is. I can retrace my steps. It's really important to label your stuff. So yeah, you know what you're doing. And then that way, then when someone looks at your desktop, they're like, hey, man, you're really organized. Not seeing files that are WAS with the bit. Nah, man, come on. Okay. Oh, did that? Whoops. Where's my audio bin? Okay, let's take a look. So if we take a look at our waveform, it's pretty extremely processed, and that's cool. It shouldn't clip digitally, like your mixer output shouldn't go into the, right at the end of the master bus. It shouldn't go into the red. Whether this does or not, I'll need to double check, but if it's squared off like this, that's cool. Like, that's fine. You've kind of got to where you needed to go. But yeah, if it's digitally clipping, that's no good. So what we'll do is we'll take this, we'll start chopping it up and see what we can come up with. Like I said before, I normally do this in Cubase because there's a lot of handy tools and shortcuts that you have in Cubase that are more designed for audio editing. Whereas in Logic it's a little bit more difficult, but that's okay. The process and the idea is still the same. We're going to take the punch and we're going to listen to that by itself. And what we should do is actually, really important, is to send everything to a group or to a bus, so that way you can kind of already have everything all together rather than just, okay, it's at the master bus, I want to turn it down and it's everything all over. No, let's be a little bit organized and let's send it to, say, bus 3, and there's bus 3 over there, and we'll turn this down just a little. Wait, that's the wrong one. For the very start of a kick, that's not so bad. You know, it still needs some work, obviously, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm really going to focus on the upper frequencies, and I should load this up as a linear phase EQ. What's actually cool with Logic, if you load a normal EQ and then decide, oh, no, I want a linear phase EQ, it'll already keep the settings that you had for the last one. That's kind of handy. Okay. For the very start, that's not so bad. But personally, I feel that this could do with a little bit more, you know, a bit more around here. And it's a little bit too, yeah, a bit too triangle, like a bit too steep. Let's just take away some, like, you know, 1K. Yeah, I like that. What I want to do right now is really emphasize the punch. You know, that frequency here. I'm going to give it a tighter Q value, tighter bandwidth. Because this is what's going to really cut through in the systems and the clubs. I think 8 dB is just a little bit too much. Just a tiny bit. But that's okay, that's fine. And then what I'll do is as well, I'll load that onto a separate channel. Send that to the same bus. And turn it down, obviously. And I'm going to load the linear phase EQ, just copy and paste. And then here, I'm going to grab this frequency there, tell that to be for the low pass filter, and turn everything else off. So that way we can hear the two sounds combined. And I've only EQ'd one of them, so that's okay, that's cool. Like I said before, the low end in the punch doesn't need to be so obvious. That might be a little bit too low, but that's fine. You hear that I've taken the same sound, and all I've done is like EQ'd part of it and then separated it out and had the low end. Important, really important. That way you get a little bit more control. Some people like to layer, like, you know, samples, like Vengeance samples or claps and stuff on the just, you know, general sampled material on the punch. That's fine. Like, at the end of the day, you know, the hard work, in my opinion, is kind of done. We've already got the tone. We've already got what is going to really make our kick our kick. So, you know, at this point, yeah, you can layer snares and housey kicks or really acoustic kick drums if you feel like it, to add a little bit more to the punch. But what you're looking for is something that's, you know, really going to cut through on a good system. Then, like, I've got the tail, the rest of my kick over here. So let's take a listen to it, and I'm going to see, you know, how it sounds, see what we can take out of it, see what we don't need, so we can process that further in an attempt to try and merge this kick. Okay, well, that's pretty good. But I don't think we need all of that bark right now. I think, personally, I want it a little bit more closed. So let's bring this. We can close that by just chopping it off like this. And all right, so we've still got like most of our signal, and it's cool. All we've literally done is changed where this particular audio region starts. Not bad. I mean, it's clicking and stuff. That's not good. We'll just extend that out and use a fade tool. Now, obviously, this is not going to sound fantastic. It's not going to sound great. But, you know, we can start putting these all together and show you, like, the process of how I go to try and merge these things. So, you can see here, it sounds a little bit separate. It sounds like they're two separate things. Boom, boom, boom. That comes with time. That comes with a lot of tweaking. Okay, well, I'm going to scroll here. I need the audio region to start there, start there. That, unfortunately, there's no real formula for it. You need to listen for that. But having said that, you know, knowing that you need to listen for it is a huge help, rather than thinking that, okay, I'm going to get everything out of the one channel, out of the one strip. Not quite. But stuff that we can do to try and make this seem a little bit more together is, you know, a bit of reverb, like I talked about before. So I'm just going to copy and paste this one that we had sitting around. obviously, you know, this is distorting. This is no good. So what we can use just to clip the signal off, we'll grab another bit crusher or a clipping type distortion. And can help us give it a little bit more gelling to the sound, like a little bit more control over what the sound is going to be like. Now I've grabbed this linear phase EQ. I've just copied and pasted. I'm not going to keep the same settings. Because I'm going to try and start EQing bits and pieces to try and make it sound a little bit more together and not like it's just been tacked on. I think the start, you know, maybe we could fade in a little bit differently. Yeah, not bad. It's hard to tell, obviously, because your sound is out there and mine's just... Maybe we can start like moving this around and see how it... I'll grab the arrow tool. Move it around and see how it sounds. Yeah, okay, you can hear actually as I pull this in, it becomes a little bit more closed. A little bit more stompy. That's because it's got less of the distorted signal and more towards the tail that came out of Drumazon. If you like that, that's cool. I ain't hating. Like, I've done kicks like this. This is sick. But it's all about context. At this particular point, you need to make creative decisions of where you want to take your kick. Is it going to be more of this style, a little bit more stompy, a little bit, you know, old school almost? Or is it going to be more open and going to be a little bit more aggressive? You know, at this particular point, yeah, you need to make those creative decisions. How am I going to take it? In which direction do I want it? There's no real right or wrong. Obviously, you know, you need a good amount of low end and stuff, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, is the kick going to be more open or is it going to be more closed? The one that we have here is more closed. We can open this because it's just a sample we've exported out of Drumazon. Open it by just moving the start sample over here, just moving where the audio region starts. And automatically it sounds more open. And so like when you're distorting stuff out of Drumazon, so if we were to go back to our original channel here, this is really determined by the decay, which is, you know, the length of how long the original 909 or whatever it is yeah, how much is going to have, how much signal is going to be, and so on. So you can have it shorter to start off with if you already have in mind that you want your kick to be shorter. Sure, go for it. Though sometimes if you have it too long, you'll end up with just a long tone, and it becomes a little bit harder and a little bit more difficult to control. And if you're putting things together, it's just going to sound like this big, long, and too open. You don't want that. You want something that moves still. It's still got that movement, even though the decay is still pretty long and that the whole signal is still, yeah. So what I'm going to do, you know what, I think I'm going to change like some of the harmonics. I'm going to change how the low end works. So what I want to do is clone that channel, and I'm going to separate it out like I did before. So I'm going to have something at 350 hertz, that's a high pass, and then the same signal after that being low pass at 350 hertz. So we can really focus once again on the same filter, 48 dB. And there we go. Send them both to the same bus and copy. Because it's a linear phase EQ, there's no real difference in sound. If we were to use just a regular EQ that doesn't do any of these calculations, or if we were to use like an analog style EQ, the result would be completely different. We'd get all these weird sort of phasing problems. It'll sound like it's a little bit out of phase. And just to give you an example of what that would be like, I'm going to load this. This is just a utility plugin. It's just to show you. I'm going to invert the phase of one of these layers. And in this particular case, it sounds better. I don't know if you can hear can you hear that there's a difference between the two? Not much, and it's more in the low end. Inverting the phase of one of these can make a huge difference, and when you're putting a kick together, can really turn like a crappier sounding sound into something that's a little bit more like, oh, okay, cool. The same thing applies when you're layering snare drums or kick drums of just like housey style kick drums or claps or whatever. You know, if it doesn't sound so great, load something like this up in Cubase. There's a little function right at the top of the mixer where you can just click it and it'll invert the phase automatically. Most software sequencers have the same thing. You know, it's a very simple thing to invert the phase. So you can do that when you're layering sounds to see if there's a difference. Maybe it'll sound better, maybe it won't, and you haven't really changed too much of it. You kept the majority of the character. It's not a drastic change. If we look in span as well, you know, maybe our listening environment is not familiar to us, maybe we don't like it, we can take a look to see what it does. You can see which harmonics are being emphasized, which series of the overtones are being louder or quieter or being whatever. So let's take a listen. Actually, before this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sum everything to mono because it's frustrating me. Now, this is with the phase inverted. I'll turn the phase back to what it was supposed to be. This is happening over here around 200 to 300 hertz. Where it will happen, I think it's got more to do where you've separated the bands are with the EQ. So whether you've high passed at 350 or 400, that's probably where it's going to change. But there's a noticeable difference there. But like I said before I even started on this, going off track, I said I wanted to change a little bit of the harmonics, you know. So what does this mean? If we go back to the picture kick that I showed you beforehand, there was this gigantic boost sitting at like, you know, 150 or 120 hertz. Okay, that's cool for club systems. Let's say we want that in our kick. All right, well, what do? Really simple. We've already separated things out. We just literally need to boost there. And I'm not doing this on the group. I'm doing this specifically on the tail. And even more specifically, I'm doing this on the subsection of the tail where I've already separated things out. So let's, you know, do a little bit of a sweep, give it a sharp Q value. Let's say 4 is good. Sounding pretty aggressive there. If I try the harmonic above, so that's the next point, that kick is actually going to have a slightly different feeling. Now it's important to note that like these are not necessarily bass frequencies, but they change the way that we listen and the way that we respond to this bass. And that's just because, you know, that's how harmonics work. They are related to the original frequency that this kick is, the fundamental frequency. But if we boost them in certain ways, our brains, our bodies respond a little bit differently. That's why, like, you can hear a kick that is in the same key from a different person, and even if you low pass it, like on the DJ mix or whatever, you can hear it thumping away. You'll get a slightly different response. You know, if it's say for instance a Zartok's kick or a Randy kick, if it's a Cripps' kick, or if it's one of mine, they're going to be different because these harmonics are a little bit different, and you will respond differently. And more importantly, actually, I found that the dance floor responds differently, which is kind of interesting. If you boost around here, you know, a lot of the time people kind of screw up their faces and you're like, really, oh yeah. Which is good, that's fantastic, yeah. But at the same time, you've got to be careful not to overdo it, because then, like, if you're listening to it on a really crap system, only that frequency will resonate, and then you won't hear any of the other music. That's just fact. I've discovered that. Like, I don't know, have you guys ever been to Tarkin's in the club in the kind of like, yeah. Well, they don't have the best subsystem, but these particular frequencies over here, you know, really stand out. And I've heard a couple of tracks where it's just become like so dominant that the people sort of stand back. They're not listening to music anymore, they're just listening to the bass. So you've got to be really careful when you start emphasizing these frequencies and where you start emphasizing, because we all respond differently to them. But nevertheless, this is the idea of just, we've separated out our drummers on and listening to it, putting it all together. Thankfully, the reverb has covered up a lot of the holes where it sounded a little bit separate, and we've just kind of got it all together. It's not bad at all. And if I filter this so we can take a look in Smexoscope and Span, or it's just Smexoscope. We can see what I was talking about. That punch, the low end in the punch right at the very start, is a lot smaller than the tail, and that's fine. I'll turn it up, and you can hear what it sounds like when it's all together. It'll sound a little bit not quite right, is probably the best way that I can describe it. I'll take the EQ off so you can hear. There's a kind of thuddiness to it. And the other thing is, like linear phase EQs tend to have like this, what's called smearing, where part of the signal will kind of like be pre-calculated and comes in and you hear this whomp a little bit beforehand. It's especially noticeable on low frequencies. So that's one of the other reasons why we'll bounce stuff down, so that we can chop off the smearing that happens before the kick. There isn't a little bit of a whomp. What I find as well, like I've noticed with this kick, there's a little bit of like a weird separation here from the punch to the tail, specifically the sub. So I'm going to just try and just invert the phase. I'm just using this gain thing to invert the phase. Look at that. It's come together. And I haven't done anything too drastic. Like, once I've exported it out of Drumazon, all I'm doing now is just a little bit of EQ here and there, changing the phase to see if we can put things together, and then chopped out a little bit of the middle section so it can all come together as a nice sound. I was about to. So that's with the phase of this low end punch inverted. I'm going to turn it back the other way around and we can see if we can hear a difference. Okay, but it gets rid of like some of that punchiness that we liked. Okay, so fair enough. We'll take that EQ down even further and see if it can sound okay. Let's take it to like 200 hertz, 240. That sounds nice. I'll take this one over here. Also, if you're separating things out by using an EQ, so you want to cut here, high pass over here and low pass over here on separate channels, use the same shelf, like the same slope. That's a mistake that I made before. Here, I'm rectifying that. I'm using 48 dB filter. You can use 12, you can use 6, you can use 24. It's what we call a crossover point. You might read about that on speakers or whatever. You hear this, they talk about this crossover point. That's what this is. And we're just manually doing it with 2 different channels and an EQ. I'm going to take this to 240 hertz. Let's take a listen and see what happens when the phase is. It starts playing around with a little bit of the punch a little bit, especially that 600, 500, 800, that region. And I'll keep on changing numbers. I don't want you to get confused. Basically, it's a big region if you think about it. Anywhere from between 500 to 800 hertz is actually quite a big region. You don't need to specifically boost with a surgical EQ at, okay, only 675 hertz. No. It's a very broad area that covers this overall sound. But overall, this isn't such a bad kick, This is, you hear it in my new track. what we can do to emphasize this as well, just to give it a little bit more love, we can put a clap, we can put a snare, and we can put just other random samples on the top. It's better to put those like with no low end in it, so a high cut, a low cut or a high pass, sorry. So that way it really gives more to the punch. You don't necessarily want that effect, pardon me, affecting the low end. But I think, to be perfectly honest with you, we've covered a lot and we've gone through most of the basics of the kick. To recap though, like a lot of the work comes from like the asymmetrical distortion. And it's really important to try and get a good sound before you bounce things down so that it makes your life a lot easier. Because I've been there before where it wasn't quite done and I thought it was going to be okay. I was listening to the tail and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm there. Chuck it in a Cubase. I'm going to chop it up and go for it. It wasn't even close. You want it to be as close as possible when you're going to take that out and resample that and reprocess that further. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what else I can add. Well, I guess the real question, is when is it done? Because it's kind of like an endless process. When is it finished? When is it done? Well, to be honest, it's something that you can always improve. It's really hard to say when it's done. I think the best way to do it is to load in a sampled kick. And there's nothing wrong with sampling. There's something wrong with stealing. And they're two different things. Sample, take it out, listen to it, compare it, but don't use it. If you start using it from somebody else's, that's stealing. It's not right. And that's great for like if you're doing disco or whatever. I think it's generally frowned upon to sample somebody else's kick from hardstyle and then use it. That's just bad jam. I don't know why. It's like stealing somebody else's car. Just saying. There's been all sorts of fights and stuff along it, and it's kind of like the ethics. I didn't make the rules. I just play by them. But sample somebody else's kick, stick it in, and compare. Go backwards and forwards. You know what? Let's check how this one sounds to one I've done earlier. Okay. Just gonna load that there. No worries. It's all good. Okay, I've got the other kick in there. Just going to match the volume so it's kind of close. Okay, so if you listen to the other one that I've already finished, there's more snappiness and more attack, and that's due to layering. That's a lot of work, and it's kind of hard to cover. Like how do you layer stuff? That's more on the ears because it's such a short amount of space. It's 50, 100 milliseconds. So start layering things on there. I think what helps a lot is like acoustic kicks and housey kicks because they've got a little bit more snap and punch to them, and then from there, like boosting around. The 5, 6, 7, 800 hertz, because that gives you more of like the click and the pop, especially around that region. That'll make the kick sound a little bit more full and more aggressive on the dance floor. But if we listen, the tails are pretty close. It's more the attack that needs work, and that's something that you resample, reprocess, and layer. So yeah, claps, snares, and so on. And then listen to them, and like I said before, use different, use the EQ to separate it out to see how the different parts are. So that way you can compare and see, okay, mine needs a little bit of this, or mine needs less of that, or mine needs some more of this, that, the other. You can do that to the bass as well. The bass in this one's pretty good. But it's more the attack that we need to work on, and like I said, that's layering. I guess that kind of concludes everything that I kind of had ready for you guys, but I'm more than willing to take on any questions if you have any, or hopefully many. No questions?
Could you explain something about pitching kicks?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, sorry, yeah. Like I talked about before, the human brain interprets sounds, between 20 to 50, even sometimes 100 milliseconds is the same sound. that's just how we work. So what we can do then is use that to pitch the tail of the sound. Some people do it differently, like I know that Chimboy and Zartox kind of load that into, load their finished kick into Contact and then use envelopes to try to stretch it up and stretch it down and stuff. I don't do it that way, and that's not right or wrong, you know, that's the way they prefer to do it, and they're making great records, so I'm not going to say it's wrong. But the way that I do it is actually I offline process it using just some time stretch. So using the time and pitch machine in Logic, but I use that specifically after the punch of the kick. So if we've just got, okay, that's cool, that's nice. We just want to really focus on this particular part here, maybe even a little bit earlier. If we were to pitch that up, let's say, this is in cents, so that's percent of a semitone. Let's try 300. Are you going to do it? Whoa. No, bad. Very bad. Okay, I'm going to have to do it this way. I don't know why my keyboard isn't working. It's just this. Oh yeah, good call. Nice. We're not all perfect. See, I've just time stretched that part. Listen to it all together. Oopsie daisy. There you go. Pitch it up and down. And that's just got to do with how we listen to sound. You know, it's within that time frame, the 20, 50 milliseconds. Well, it's more. It's closer to 100. And when you just take it and you manually pitch it up and manually pitch it down. You can do that in Cubase. You can do that in Logic, like I've done it here. I prefer to do it in Cubase just because like the algorithms, and this is like a whole different subject in itself. The algorithms used for time stretching are not all created equal. Some are better than others, and some sound better on kicks, even though they're technically worse time stretching algorithms. Like this one doesn't sound so bad. I mean, if we were to take this up further, so we've only done it 3 semitones. If we were to take this up 7 semitones, it might sound pretty terrible. If we were to use perhaps, I'm trying to think of another time stretching algorithm. There's one called Dirac, which sounds fantastic on everything. It's really, really high-end stuff. And you can use that to pitch. Trying to think what other, there's one called Radium that you can buy as a plug-in for Logic. But I've never tried it, but I've heard reports that it's pretty good as well. But that's it really. You know, the process is you'll take the tail where the brain thinks that it's all part of one sound, and then you'll repitch that up and or down. And actually, one of the reasons why I pitch up and down, and I do it a lot, like I love pitching up and down. A lot of people are like, no, what are you doing? No, it should all be the same. Because hardcore has most of the time on the same pitch. It's because it's more musical. And yeah, like if you've got one kick sort of going in the same key, and then you decide to do a key change or using a different chord, using like a strange diminished chord that's not quite in the normal key of your track, your kick is going to sound like off. There's going to be something wrong there, and that's one of the reasons why I like mine go all over the place, because I change a lot of chords, and I prefer it's more melodic and stuff. Yeah, that's it.
I have a question about a track you did with the Prophet.
Yeah.
The anthem for 10 Years of Scan Track.
Right.
If you listen to the mid-intro, your kick and your screech, or what do you want to call it, sound so separate.
I think.
Sounds so clean, you know.
Yeah. Look, when it comes to mixing, mixing hardstyle and making the sounds for hardstyle are like worlds apart. When you're making sounds for hardstyle, you want it to be aggressive, really in your face and stuff, and particularly with the kick, you want it to sound, especially this kick, you want it to sound really together. But when it comes to mixing hardstyle, that's a different thing. You want stuff to sound as clean and as separated and as surgical as possible. Because let's take this kick, for example. That's all the way up the frequency spectrum. There's a huge boost where the ears are sensitive. There's a lot of low end. So we need to remove a lot of stuff out of the rest of the frequencies that are going on in the instruments that go on with this kick. Otherwise, everything gets muddy and everything gets messy, and it just doesn't sound good. There's be an overload of noise everywhere. So yeah, you need to separate stuff out. And the way that you can do that is, okay, really savage high-pass EQs. Say for instance on that screech, I'm not going to need 350 hertz in that screech because my kick has got 350 hertz and lots of it. So I can take that away. It's that simple.
But that's what Deepak told. You need a 200 hertz in your kick for your lead to be more present?
That, I think, that's really up to personal taste. Like, and that's my agent. I think that's up to personal taste. The best thing, yeah, is just find how clean it sounds and just push the boundaries. What I do as well is, like, I'll have a lead, you know, and during the breakdown, no high pass, you can hear everything. There's a lot of bass in it and stuff, and trying to make it as clean as possible, but yeah. And then afterwards, when the kick drops, I'll automate a high pass filter that'll kick in as soon as the kick drops, so that way there's no dirty frequencies, and I get the proper solid, you know, feel of the kick. It can be 300, it can be lower, it can be 2, it could, you know, depending on the sound, it can be much higher. Like I've made some really, really, you know, almost dubstep style screeches, you know, the really resonant kind of stuff. And because a lot of their energy is around 1K, even up to 3K, I don't need the low end. Take it out when the kick is there, you're all cool. And that helps clean up the mix.
Sometimes when a kick is pitched up, you hear more bass than the lower.
That depends on the listening environment, I find. And that's why I use span. When I pitch it up and down, I want to make sure that the frequencies are equal. And that really has to do more with the listening environment. I mean, we've all been there when we've been working on a track and then, you know, okay, cool, it sounds really good. And then you take it down, you know, you just take the track down. You take it down a semitone. Where the hell did all the bass go? That's got to do with, you know, the room, the listening environment and stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I'll constantly have Voxengo Span or any other frequency analyzer open, so that way it's all even.
Yeah, in my experience, most people who work at home in their studios, they have problems around 70 hertz, which are too loud, and 125 hertz. It has to do with the dimensions of the room. So if you pitch them up and they come to 70 hertz, it usually sounds a lot louder. That's because of your room, not because of the kicks.
Yep. Any other questions down the front?
Did you ever make a kick with headphones?
Yes, but I don't like it, and for a couple of reasons why I don't like working on headphones for kicks. What was the question? Yeah. Oh, have I ever worked on a kick with headphones? And the answer is yes, but I didn't like it, and to be honest, like I kind of reworked it in the morning after I could use my proper speakers. For a start, I use headphones at night, so that way I'm not disturbing the neighbors. But the reason why I don't like working on headphones is, first off, it's loud, bro. Like, you're working with stupid amounts of gain and distortion, you know? It's really, really loud. And they're aggressive frequencies. They're not nice things. It's not like a piano which sounds nice to the ears. No, dude. This is like hard, harsh stuff. And if you're subjecting your ears to that kind of abuse, I mean, like, oh, dude. You know, you wake up the day afterwards going like, what the hell did I do? Sorry, Mum, what can you say that again? You know, that sort of a thing. It's, yeah. You can technically, if you wanted to, if you were really careful by turning the volume down and trying, but it's not the ideal environment because it's just not the ideal environment. I wish I could say why, you know, it's just, when it's kind of like there in front of you and it's a little bit bigger and you can, even with a bit of the ambience of the room, you can better separate things out. You're not too squashed into the sound. Whereas when you're working with headphones, you're too inside of the sound and you're going to make decisions that naturally make things sound better for the headphones, not necessarily better for out there.